seen this one thing, Ayanna Jackson come out?
Yeah.
About Pac, about a story. 20 years later, man. What you think about it?
I mean, there's big holes in her story. You know what I mean? Big gaping holes. But, I mean, you know, when I think about that time period and the things that were going on and the culture, you know, things was obviously very different than now, you know. And, you know, men abuse their power, you know what I mean? Like, so it wasn't a surprising story in that way. But in terms of how she told the story and the missing elements and her explanations for why she was in that situation, there's big holes, you know what I mean? And it was hard to not question, you know, why suddenly she would not go into detail or, you know what I mean, say the things that would explain her actions and her responsibility in that whole situation.
How much can you remember? I know it was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Can you take me back to 93, 94? Were you following the case back then?
Yeah, I was definitely following the case. That was 94. And obviously that was the first time Pac was shot. That was 94, and I was definitely following the case. I was at I think Vibe magazine at that time, or like I was at the Source and Vibe that year, so I was definitely following the case.
I don't know if you were in the courtroom, but
no, I wasn't in the courtroom, but you know, I always found it funny, and even when she retold the story now, like there was that big problem, which was that Pac was charged for rape, but Haitian Jack was not.
Right.
And there was two different cases, and it was harder to believe that Pac would rape a girl that he already had sex with several times, met in the club. Supposedly she went down on him in the club. They were obviously having a sexual relationship, and then suddenly he would rape her, and then he gets charged, but the other people in the room didn't, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that was already a glaring contradiction. And then, you know, in this recent interview, she basically says that Haitian Jack raped her, but then, you know, doesn't talk about Haitian Jack, just talks about the fact that she said Pac raped her, you know what I mean? So right. that was always from 94 was hard to believe.
Yeah, I think there's one part where she's like, the way I met Pac was that he went up to me and put his hands in the jeans. And then she was like, no, Haitian Jack introduced me or something like that.
Yeah.
So like, what the fuck? Which one is it, bitch? Like, what the fuck?
If you think about it, between Haitian Jack and Suge Knight, they changed the course of history. You know what I mean? Those two dudes really created all the problems for Pac, at least. And you know, I always try to remember that Pac was like 23, 24. He was a young dude making a lot of mistakes and associating with the wrong kinds of people. And you know, the real contention between Big and Pac was that Pac felt Big should have warned him, should have, you know, helped him and contacted him after they got shot and so on. But Big's whole thing was like, yo, you dealing with some dangerous dudes. You know what I mean? I told you not to deal with them, and you went ahead anyway. You know what I mean? And then at some point, Pac was out of his reach. At least that's how Big looked at it. You know what I mean? And Pac was like, yo, you owed me more loyalty than that. So that was the thing, like, you know what I mean? Like, Pac was running with some of the most dangerous dudes in New York, and if you lived in New York, you knew that already.
Something I see when looking at that Ayanna Jackson interview, I'm looking through the comments, and one person said, this bitch basically fucked up his life, because if he never caught that kid, he never messed with her, you know, he wouldn't have got shot at the studio, he wouldn't go to the jail. If he didn't go to jail, he wouldn't sign a death row, he probably would have still been alive.
I mean, again, like, you could blame a lot of people, but at the end of the day, you know what I mean, that, like, Pac put himself in that situation, you know what I mean, like, you know, I can't vouch for that woman's character, you know what I mean, like, she also put herself in that situation, but I don't think she deserved to be raped, but I know that it was, you know, I know that it doesn't make sense for Tupac to rape her, you know what I mean, and it wasn't in his character, at least how he presented himself. So, you know, it's a lot of bad decisions happened, and it ended up really, you know, Pac really paying for it.
A lot of people question, like, how come his case got separated, Haitian Jack's case got separated from Pac? How come he got, I believe, you know, this could be good speculation, but I believe he got caught a lesser charge, and that lesser charge was because he was an informant.
I mean, that's Pac's contention, and a lot of other people talked about it in that way too, you know. I mean, you know, everybody has to, like, tiptoe around the whole Haitian Jack thing, but, you know, when you look at it, how are they having separate cases, and why is Ayanna Jackson only pointing to Pac and not Haitian Jack? You know what I mean? And she, like I said, if you listen to the interview, she specifically says that Haitian Jack raped her, and if there's any person most active in her story, it was Haitian Jack. He came into the room, he had sexual, she had the out of body experience, or whatever she was saying, but you know what I mean, like, she specifically fingered Haitian Jack, you know what I mean, and the thing was, the way she said she was straddling Pac, and you know what I mean, he held her down supposedly. I don't know how Pac was in that position and was controlling that situation, right. You know what I mean? But I mean, you know, to be honest, I felt bad for her. You know what I mean? Like, because she just turned her whole life inside out. You know what I mean? For, I don't know how much Vlad pays on $5K for the interview or whatever it is, but she can't, you know, she could have kept living her life peacefully. You know, she decided to come back out, and now I'm sure, you know, it's hard for her to walk in the streets again. When I listen to the story, like I said, there's gaping holes, but there's a part of me that feels like, you know, a lot of people are paying the price because, you know, as a whole, hip hop was abusive. You know what I mean? Like, during that era, you know, sharing groupies was like regular business, and everybody talked about it, and it ain't no fun if the homies can't have none, and you know what I mean? Like, that whole culture was problematic if you think about it, you know what I mean? But, you know, Pac being such a pioneer, he caught everything first. You know what I mean? He was Me Too before Me Too. You know what I mean? Like, the whole thing with Pac is that you could tell by his intelligence and how he moved in the world that he knew better, and he kind of allowed things to happen. You know what I mean? He allowed things to happen in his environment that created real problems for himself. You know, so I always try to look at it as, you know, in terms of the responsibility, like, you know, Ayanna Jackson, she put herself in the situation. She's responsible for herself. Pac, he put himself in that situation. He's responsible for himself. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you deal with these kind of people who don't have your back, who aren't trustworthy, who, you know, may give you a Rolex, but they put you in a situation. You know what I mean? Like, we'll never know what the real truth is. You know what I mean? And 20 years later, it's definitely JFK type situation, but you know, from everything I've ever heard about Haitian Jack and what was going on at that time, Pac knew that he was dealing with a dangerous cat.
Right.
You know, the most ill conspiracy I've heard about that was that, you know, Haitian Jack is working for the government. They was trying to set Pac up. That's what Pac believed, but by the time he got shot up, and you know, you're dealing with really funny situations. You know what I'm saying? They already knew that he was dealing with this girl, but you know, Pac was calling that girl up and bringing her to the hotel. So if it was Haitian Jack that brought the girl into the picture, Pac fell for the bait. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What do you think this could be? Could this be like all set up for a book, for a deal, something for her?
Ayanna Jackson?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. I don't see why she would leave the piece of her life. You know what I mean? Where she was not. No one was even thinking about her too deeply. No one knew what she really looked like. You know what I mean? Unless she was like really digging into the story. So she put herself on Front Street. I think it was in poor taste for Vlad to do it. You know what I mean? I'm sure he thinks like it was journalism, but you know, I think if Vlad understood the value that Pac had for, you know, that people have for Pac and his image, like he wouldn't have been so cavalier with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, clicks.